Well, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us once again. Today we're starting off a new series. We're calling this series Doubt It.
Doubt it.
Doubt It. And the whole point of this series is it's about doubts. It's about questions. And we're just trying to focus on the fact that we all have questions. We all have doubts. That's a completely normal thing. And not only is it normal, but it's also necessary.
Yeah.
We were thinking about this and just kind of talking about questions and about why questions are kind of a thing that we don't really talk about a lot. But think about it. Like, think when we're born questioning. I mean, not like when you're a baby because you can't talk, but once you get old enough to talk, my son Micaiah, right now he's 2. So he's right in that phase of like having a grasp of language, but also his language is used to question everything. Constantly asking why, constantly asking what about this, or why do we do that, or what is that? I mean, just the other day he was going to come inside from swimming. I said, hey, before you go in, you got to dry off. Why? Yeah. I said, well, because you're all wet. He looks at me, he's like, well, what's wet mean? Well, it means you're covered in liquid. What's liquid? Liquid is something that's not dry. What does that mean? It's like just one thing after another. Everything's a question in a series of questions. And that's normal. I mean, we know kids do that. But then we kind of get to a place where we think like, well, we should grow out of that.
Yeah.
We should not be like that anymore. So the interesting thing is we still, I think, even as adults, even as we grow up, we still have questions. The difference is we stop asking questions. Mm-hmm. Maybe because we view it as childish or we view it as something that we shouldn't do as we get older. Whatever it is, we all have questions. We just stop asking. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of reasons. I mean, it could be that we don't want to look stupid, or we feel embarrassed that we don't know something, or we just think we're the only one with that question. And so we stop asking. But the problem is that if we stop asking questions, then it's easy to feel alone. It's easy to feel like you're the only one with that question.
Yeah.
And that's really never the case.
Nope.
I mean, how often are you in a place, a classroom, at church, whatever it might be, and you have a question you don't want to ask, but maybe someone else does, and then like right away, 5 or 6 of the people are like, yeah, same question.
Thank God, yeah.
They all have the same thing, exactly. So we're not alone in our questions. And the thing is, too, if we don't ask them, we're not going to get answers. So the truth that we're going to be looking at in this series is that we all have questions.
Yeah. And not only do we have questions, but the people in the Bible also had questions. You're not the first person to ever have questions. You certainly won't be the last. I mean, literally thousands of questions are asked in the Bible. And
we didn't count them all, but there's a lot.
No, we have no idea. I'm paraphrasing or spitballing here.
Yeah.
I think it's about thousands.
I think thousands.
Somewhere around thousands. And we're going to be taking a look at 2 Psalms during our first lesson this evening, or morning, or whenever you're watching this, I guess, for you. And Psalms are these expressions of different feelings of heartache and joy, of despair and thanksgiving, of desperation and appreciation, and even mourning, right? And this Psalm that we're going to take a look at first is the 22nd Psalm. So if you go ahead and turn to the book of Psalms, go to the 22nd chapter. We're just going to take a look at a couple of snippets because it's a little long. The first thing that I want to highlight is verses 1 through 3 and then verses 7 through 9. So the Bible says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? O my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. And then, beginning at verse 7, we're going to look at 7 through 9, it says, all who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. Yet you are he who took me from the womb, and you made me trust you at my mother's breast. So here David is expressing obviously some very clear difficulty and frustration in his situation. Again, looking at the very beginning of the psalm, he starts by saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? And if that sounds familiar, it's because it is. Jesus echoed this exact same sentiment when he was on the cross going through a very difficult situation. And both David and Jesus are expressing what they're feeling or what's going on with them. The difference is David is expressing a feeling of being forsaken or abandoned by God that is simply not the case. Whereas Jesus experienced the very reality of being abandoned, like literally being separated from the beginning, or from all of eternity, the first time that he had ever experienced a separation from God for you and I. And so expressing specifically what they're going through and how they're feeling in these situations. But look how David responds. In verse 3, he says, "Yet you are holy." And then again in verse 9, he says, "Yet you are he who took me from my mother's womb." So basically what that "yet" implies, it's this conjunction that attaches the first half of like a statement to the next one. And he's saying, nevertheless, like even though I'm going through this, yet you are holy. Even though I'm going through this, yet you are the one who took me from my mother's womb and made me trust in you at birth, right? So basically the importance of "yet" is that it helps us get to where we need to be in understanding of who God is, even though we're going through difficult times. So the last thing that I wanted to look at was verses 11 and 19. 11 says, "Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help." And then it says in 19, "But you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid." So again, it's going from this movement of like feeling, well, we're going through something specific, and moves us to this, it transitions us from thinking about and focusing on our situation to thinking more about who God is.
Yeah, and that's the thing. No matter what we face, we need to keep the focus on God. Now, we're not telling you always have to feel happy or always have to enjoy your experiences, or a lot of times doubts and questions come up from negative experiences. But the focus needs to stay on God. And that's actually what we see in Psalm 88. Now, this is, again, one of just literally over 100 Psalms, but this one in particular, there's this group called the Sons of Korah. They're talking, and they're saying, basically they can't see any good in their situation. Just to point out a few sections here. So verse 3, they say, "My soul is full of troubles." Doesn't sound too good. Verse 9 says, "My eyes grow dim through sorrow." And then this psalm, Psalm 88, actually ends in verse 18. This is the end of the psalm where it leaves off. It says, "You have caused my beloved and my friend to shun me. My companions have become darkness." That's where it ends.
Ouch.
It stops there. So there's no like happy ending. There's no happy resolution. It just stops right there at that. So they really aren't seeing any good, any hope in the situation. They're feeling hopeless. And that's okay. That happens sometimes. Sometimes we're in a place where we just feel hopeless. They can't see any good in their situation, but they can still see good in God. Because look what else they say there. So verse 1 says, "O Lord, God of my salvation, I cry out to you day and night before you." They see good there. They see good in God. Later on, if we look at also verse 13, it says, "But I, O Lord, cry to you. In the morning, my prayer comes before you." So throughout this psalm, even though they're seeing hopelessness and not seeing any good in the situation, they're still focusing back on God and saying, this is what my situation looks like, back on God. But this is what my situation looks like, back on God. But never in there do they say, so I'm happy. So I feel like it's going to be fine. They're not feeling that. So they're being honest. And that's what the Bible's full of. People that are honest. It's not about having a perfect faith. It's about having an honest faith.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, sometimes when we interact with people, we don't always want to be honest. Because what's inside our heads, we don't want people to always see. And so sometimes we take that and we put that onto God. We don't want God to see what's in our heads. But guess what? He's already seen it. He already knows. We don't have to fake it with God. We're not going to fool God. So we can be honest.
Yeah.
So questions happen. Questions come up. We all have questions. But what we don't do, we can't let our questions stop us. Again, like it says in verse 13 there, it's okay, but God, I cry to you. In the midst of those questions, in the midst of those doubts, cry out to God. Don't ignore the questions. Don't let the questions stop you. Persevere through those questions.
Yeah. And when it comes to our faith, questions sometimes seem bad. They seem like it's a negative or that we shouldn't have them. Some people might think that, oh, well, if you have questions, then you're drifting away from God. Or if you have questions, then you don't really have faith in general. But that's not the right mindset to have. Honestly, questions can be good. Again, going back to the example that Pastor Michael used with Micaiah, when he asks questions, that's how he learns. You know, it may seem annoying, and you may want to just tell him to just take a chill pill for a second, but the reality is that's how you get this greater understanding of the things around you. And for us, it's actually how we deepen our faith. Understand that faith is not just accepting everything that we hear or just accepting everything that is happening to us. Faith is actually about seeking God in our questions and in our situations, just as both of the psalmists did in the Psalms that we looked at. Questions are a sign that we want to learn, that we want to grow, that we want to discover new things, and we can't get answers if we don't ask questions. It's a simple equation. So understand that you are not alone in your questions, okay? And admitting that they exist helps you move past them and say, and yet, to your doubts. The same way that David said, and yet, to his situation, and yet to his circumstance, and yet God is still who he is. You know, sometimes because we doubt, or sometimes we doubt because we have pain, because we need to vent, because we're trying to think things through, or we doubt because we ask really hard questions and we're trying to work through and figure out what those answers are, and that's okay. But understand that despite how we feel, there's hope, because there's always hope when we trust in God's faithfulness. And so that's our initial response or time for understanding that you're not alone in your questions. Lean into the fact that you might have some questions and trust in God's faithfulness.
Absolutely. All right, we'll see you guys next time.